I never thought I'd be the one to blow up my family. Funny how life works out sometimes. Hey everyone, I'm Mackenzie. 2 months ago, I came home early from the hospital after minor surgery. I wasn't supposed to be discharged until the next day, but my recovery went well, and I just wanted to sleep in my own bed. I should have called ahead. I really should have called. When I walked through that door, I stumbled into the kind of nightmare you can't wake up from. The kind that forces you to choose between the family you've always known and the truth that's been hiding in plain sight. My mom always said I had a flair for the dramatic. Well, Mom, you haven't seen anything yet. If you've ever had to choose between loyalty and self-respect, or if you're just curious about how I turned my family's Thanksgiving dinner into what my cousins now call the Great Cranberry Massacre of 2024, hit that subscribe button. This story's got everything: betrayal, revenge, and yes, cranberry sauce in places it should never, ever be. Let me take you back to where it all began. Growing up in Westfield, Connecticut, our family was what the neighbors called picture perfect. My father, a successful orthopedic surgeon at Yale New Haven Hospital, my mother, Claire, the consummate hostess and charity board member, and my younger sister, Taylor, the golden child who never put a foot wrong. Then there was me, the odd one out, the daughter who asked too many questions and never quite fit the mold my mother had carefully crafted for our family. Mom was the undisputed queen of our household. Everything revolved around her moods, her preferences, her social calendar. Dad worked long hours, and when he was home, he mostly deferred to her. "Just make your mother happy," he'd whisper to me during our arguments. "Life's easier that way." I didn't understand then how prophetic those words would become. My childhood memories are filled with these little moments of humiliation, carefully orchestrated to keep me in line. Like my Sweet 16, when I'd begged for a small gathering at our lake house with just my closest friends. Instead, Mom threw an elaborate party at the country club, inviting all the right people, mostly her friends' children who barely spoke to me at school. She gave a speech about how proud she was of her challenging but lovable daughter who was finally growing into a young lady worthy of the Anderson name. The room laughed. I stood there in a dress I hated, smiling through tears while Taylor played the perfect sister, rubbing my back and whispering that Mom meant well. Or the time during my sophomore year of college when I brought home my first serious boyfriend, Raj, during Thanksgiving break. Mom spent the entire weekend making subtle comments about cultural differences and how some relationships are better as learning experiences. She even went as far as showing him my embarrassing childhood photos, not the cute ones, but the awkward phase ones, so he knows what he might be getting in the future. Raj and I broke up 2 weeks later. Despite everything, I still sought her approval. That's why, when I got promoted to senior editor at the publishing house last year, I decided to make a grand gesture. I used nearly all my savings to book a surprise family trip to Tuscany for my parents' 35th wedding anniversary. Mom had always talked about visiting the Italian countryside, staying in a villa, taking cooking classes. I spent months planning it in secret, coordinating with Dad, Taylor, even my mom's sister, Aunt Patricia. I wanted to show Mom that I could do something right, something that would make her proud. What I didn't know then was that I wasn't the only one with a secret. While I was planning villas and vineyard tours, my mother was nurturing a secret of her own, one that had been festering beneath our family's perfect surface for years. The signs were there if I had been willing to see them. The late-night phone calls she took in the garden, the unexplained absences, the new lingerie that appeared in her drawer but never seemed to be worn when Dad was home. Dad's colleague from the hospital, Dr. James Wilson, had been a fixture in our lives for as long as I could remember. He and his wife Helen came to all our important family events. He was my father's best friend, the godfather to my sister. Uncle Jimmy, we called him. He had a hearty laugh that filled rooms and brought expensive gifts for birthdays and Christmas. He was the one who convinced my father to buy the beach house in Rhode Island where we spent our summers. The beach house where, as I would later discover, my mother and he would meet when Dad was on call and the rest of us were out. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The truth is, I might never have discovered any of this if it weren't for that surgery and my early discharge. Sometimes I wonder if our family would still be intact if I'd just stayed in that hospital bed one more night. But then I remember what Taylor told me later. The truth doesn't break families, Mac. Lies do. And our family had been built on a foundation of lies for a very, very long time. It was early October when I went in for surgery. Nothing serious, just a laparoscopic procedure to remove some ovarian cysts. I was supposed to stay overnight for observation, but by evening, the doctor said my vitals were stable and I could go home if I wanted to. I didn't even think twice. Hospital beds are uncomfortable, and I just wanted my own space, my own pillows, and maybe the comfort of being around family while I recovered. I called an Uber and headed home, excited to surprise everyone. Dad was at a medical conference in Boston, and Taylor was living in Chicago, so it would just be Mom and me for a couple of days. I thought maybe we could order in, watch some movies, the kind of mother-daughter bonding we rarely had without her criticizing my life choices. When the Uber pulled up to our colonial-style house with its perfect landscaping and warm porch lights, I felt a surge of relief. Home. The driver helped me with my small overnight bag. I was still a bit tender from the surgery, and I tipped him extra for his kindness. Our driveway had an unfamiliar car parked in it, a sleek black Audi. For a moment, I thought Mom might have invited some friends over, but it was nearly 9 p.m. on a Wednesday, not exactly prime social hour in suburban Connecticut. Maybe she'd joined a new committee or book club? She was always joining something. I used my key to open the front door, trying to be quiet in case she was on the phone or watching TV. The house was dimly lit, but I could hear soft music coming from the kitchen, Fleetwood Mac's Landslide, one of Mom's favorites. I smiled, thinking I'd catch her in one of those rare, unguarded moments, maybe dancing while making tea, the way she used to when I was very young. "Mom?" I called out softly as I set my bag down in the foyer. "I got discharged early. Surprise!" No answer, but the music continued. I noticed 2 wine glasses on the console table in the hallway. Definitely not alone. As I moved further into the house, I caught unfamiliar scents mingling with our home's usual smell. A cologne that wasn't my father's, something woodsy and expensive. I heard laughter from the direction of the kitchen, then hushed voices. My mother's distinctive laugh, the real one, not the polite society chuckle she used at fundraisers. I hadn't heard that laugh directed at anything I'd said in years. "Claire, we should open another bottle." "This Bordeaux is exceptional," a male voice said, a voice I recognized immediately. My stomach dropped. Uncle Jimmy, Dr. Wilson, my father's best friend. I should have turned around. I should have quietly left and pretended I never came home. But something pulled me forward. Curiosity, disbelief, or maybe just the desperate hope that there was an innocent explanation. I stepped into the kitchen doorway and froze. Mom was perched on the island counter, her blouse partially unbuttoned, lipstick smudged. Between her legs stood Dr. Wilson, his hands on her waist, his suit jacket draped over one of our kitchen chairs. They were so engrossed in each other, they didn't notice me at first. "You know Richard won't be back until Friday," my mother said, running her fingers through his silver hair. "We could go upstairs for once, sleep in a real bed." "What about Mackenzie? Isn't she coming home tomorrow?" he asked, kissing her neck. Mom laughed again, that rare, genuine laugh. "Please, she'll be hopped up on pain meds.
Besides, she'll probably go straight to her apartment. You know how she is. Never wants to be taken care of. The wine glass I didn't realize I was holding, I must have picked it up from the hallway table, slipped from my fingers and shattered on the hardwood floor. They jerked apart like teenagers caught by parents, not the other way around. Mackenzie! My mother's face drained of color. You're supposed to be in the hospital. Dr. Wilson straightened his tie, his face a mask of practiced concern. Mackenzie, this isn't, we were just, I couldn't speak, couldn't move. 29 years of life, and I'd never been truly speechless until that moment. My surgical incisions throbbed with my racing pulse. Sweetheart, Mom slid off the counter, quickly buttoning her blouse. You're not supposed to be here. Let me explain. How long? My voice didn't sound like my own.
How long has this been going on? They exchanged a look, the kind of intimate, wordless communication that only comes from years of practice. It's complicated, Mackenzie, Dr. Wilson said in his best bedside manner voice. Your mother and I wasn't asking you, I snapped, my shock hardening into something sharper. Mom, how long have you been cheating on Dad? She flinched at the word cheating. That's a very simplistic way of looking at a complex situation. Answer the question. She squared her shoulders, transforming before my eyes from the caught cheater back into Claire Anderson, queen of her domain. Jimmy and I have had an understanding for 15 years. 15 years! Half my life. Through high school graduations and college move-in days, through family vacations and holiday dinners. While Dad worked night shifts saving lives, his best friend was sleeping with his wife. Does Dad know? Another look between them. This time, Dr. Wilson answered, Your father and I have an arrangement. The room spun around me. An arrangement? What did that even mean? What kind of arrangement? I demanded, gripping the doorframe for support. Your father has his companions as well, my mother said coolly. We decided long ago to stay together for the family, for appearances. Connecticut society isn't as progressive as you might think. The Tuscany trip flashed through my mind, the villa I'd booked, the cooking class reservations, the thousands of dollars I'd spent to celebrate their marriage, their sham of a marriage. So our whole family life has been a lie? My voice cracked. All those lectures about propriety and the Anderson family name, while you've been sneaking around behind everyone's backs? Not behind everyone's, she said quietly. Taylor knows. That was the final blow. My perfect sister knew this family secret too. I was truly the only one in the dark. I turned and walked out without another word, ignoring their calls. I drove to a hotel, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. That night, I made a decision. The anniversary trip to Tuscany was still happening, but it wasn't going to be the celebration I'd planned. Instead, it would be the backdrop for something entirely different, the dismantling of the elaborate lie I'd been living in for 29 years. I spent the next 6 weeks in a state of cold calculation. I didn't confront my father. I didn't tell Taylor I knew. I simply pretended that night never happened. Mom tried to call, to explain, to minimize, but I kept our conversations brief and practical. Yes, I was recovering well. No, I didn't need anything. Yes, I was still handling the anniversary arrangements. It'll be so special, I told her on the phone, my voice honeyed with false enthusiasm. Everyone will be there. Dad's colleagues from the hospital, your friends from the club, Aunt Patricia and Uncle George flying in from Seattle. I could almost hear her panic through the phone. Everyone? Don't you think something smaller would be more appropriate? Just family? Mom, it's your 35th anniversary. We need to celebrate your and Dad's incredible marriage. I emphasized the word incredible just enough. The day of the party arrived, the Saturday before Thanksgiving. I'd chosen to host it at the country club, the same one where she'd humiliated me on my 16th birthday. Symmetry felt important somehow. I arrived early to oversee the final arrangements. The private dining room overlooked the golf course, decorated with cream roses and silver accents. At each place setting was a custom gift bag containing a bottle of Tuscan olive oil and a small box with the trip itinerary, scheduled for the following month. The centerpiece of the room was a large screen for the slideshow I'd prepared of their love story through the years. Guests began arriving at 7. I greeted them in a fitted black dress, playing the perfect hostess, just as my mother had taught me. Dad looked distinguished in his tuxedo, accepting congratulations with his typical modest charm. Mom was radiant in pale blue, though I noticed her eyes darting nervously around the room. Dr. Wilson and his wife Helen arrived just before dinner. Helen hugged me warmly. She'd always been kind to me. I wondered if she knew, if she had her own arrangements, too. The thought made me sad for her. My mother visibly relaxed when she saw the slideshow beginning. Wholesome family photos, their wedding day, anniversaries, family vacations. Nothing that would raise eyebrows. She even squeezed my hand during the toast I gave, speaking about the example of love and commitment they'd shown Taylor and me. The breaking point came during dessert. I stood to make one final announcement. Before we end this beautiful celebration, I have a surprise. I smiled at the curious faces around the room. As many of you know, I've been planning a special anniversary gift, a family trip to Tuscany. Appreciative murmurs rippled through the crowd. But what you don't know is that while planning this trip, I made a discovery about my parents' marriage that changed everything I thought I knew about family, about loyalty, and about truth. The room went silent. My mother's face froze in a half-smile. Dad looked confused. Dr. Wilson stared intently at his dessert plate. 15 years ago, my mother and Dr. James Wilson began an affair that has continued to this day, with my father's knowledge and apparent consent. Gasps echoed around the room. Helen Wilson's fork clattered onto her plate. I discovered this arrangement 6 weeks ago when I came home early from the hospital and found them together in our kitchen. What fascinated me most wasn't the affair itself. People are complicated, I get that. It was the hypocrisy. I turned directly to my mother. You built our family on the importance of appearances, on doing what others expected, on the sacred Anderson name. You shamed me throughout my childhood for being too honest, too loud, too much myself. You ruined my 16th birthday in this very room because I wanted something simple rather than the elaborate show you needed to put on for your friends. You drove away my first serious boyfriend because he didn't fit your image of who I should be with. My voice remained steady, but tears streamed down my face. And all that time, you were living a double life, the perfect wife in public, someone else in private. You made me feel like I was never good enough while you were breaking the very rules you claimed to live by. I reached into my clutch and pulled out a small envelope. So here's my real anniversary gift. 1 ticket to Tuscany, for Dad only. The villa is gorgeous, the cooking classes are booked, and the vineyards are expecting you. The rest of us will be spending Thanksgiving at home, having an honest conversation for once in our lives. I placed the envelope in front of my father, whose face had gone ashen. Mackenzie, that's enough, my mother hissed, her composure cracking.
No, Mom, it's not. For once in my life, it's not enough to make you happy by staying quiet. I turned to the stunned room of guests. I apologize for the dramatic evening. The country club staff will be bringing coffee to the terrace. Please enjoy the rest of your night. I walked out with my head high, ignoring my mother's calls, Dr. Wilson's wife's sobs, and the explosive murmuring that erupted behind me. In the parking lot, I finally let myself break down, leaning against my car as sobs racked my body. A hand touched my shoulder. I turned, expecting Taylor or maybe my father, but instead found Helen Wilson, her elegant makeup streaked with tears.
"I always knew," she said quietly, "but hearing it confirmed like that? I'm so sorry," I whispered, suddenly horrified at what I'd done to this innocent woman. "I shouldn't have—" "No," she interrupted firmly. "You did exactly what needed to be done. Some secrets poison everyone they touch. Thank you for having the courage I never did." She hugged me tightly, then walked to her car, alone. As she drove away, I realized the true scale of the earthquake I'd just caused. Lives were changing course in that building behind me, including my own. The aftermath was exactly the chaos you'd expect. Mom didn't come home that night. Dad sat in his study until dawn, drinking scotch and staring at walls. Taylor flew in from Chicago the next morning, furious with me for my public execution of our family. "You could have confronted them privately," she raged as she paced my apartment. "Did you have to destroy everyone in one fell swoop?" "You knew," I said quietly. "All this time, you knew and never told me." She stopped pacing, her anger deflating slightly. "I found out when I was 17, walked in on them at the beach house. Mom swore me to secrecy, said it would kill Dad if it came out wrong. But it didn't kill Dad, did it? Because he already knew. He had his own arrangements." Taylor sat heavily on my couch. "Not at first. That came later. After Mom told him I knew, they had this big blow-up. Dad threatened divorce, but then—" She shrugged helplessly. "Country club memberships, hospital board positions, social standing, it all mattered more than honesty. So they made their deal. They'd stay married, keep up appearances, but live separate lives behind closed doors. And you were okay with that?" I couldn't keep the judgment from my voice. "I wasn't okay with it, Mac. I was 17 and terrified of our family falling apart." By the time I was old enough to process it properly, the arrangement seemed normal. She looked at me with tears in her eyes. "I wanted to tell you so many times, but Mom said you wouldn't understand, that you'd react exactly like this." "Well, she was right about something for once," I said bitterly. The next week was a blur of explosive family meetings. Mom finally came home, looking smaller somehow. Helen Wilson filed for divorce. Dad's companion, as it turned out, was a nurse anesthetist at his hospital, a woman 15 years his junior who genuinely seemed to care for him. The most surprising conversation came from Aunt Patricia, Mom's sister, who called me 3 days after the party. "I've been waiting 20 years for someone to call Claire on her bullshit," she said without preamble when I answered the phone. "Your mother has been living by different rules than the ones she sets for everyone else since we were kids." "You knew too?" I asked, exhausted by the growing list of people who had been in on the secret. "Suspected, never confirmed. But that's not why I'm calling. I want you to know that what you did took courage. The Anderson way has always been to sweep unpleasantness under expensive rugs. You refused, and I'm proud of you." That conversation was the first moment I felt something other than rage or grief, a small spark of validation that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't the villain in this story. Thanksgiving arrived with no clear plan. Our traditional family dinner seemed impossible.
But the alternative, spending the holiday alone, felt equally wrong. In the end, it was Taylor who created a third option. "I've invited everyone to my place," she announced the day before Thanksgiving. "Mom, Dad, you, even Helen Wilson and Aunt Patricia. We're going to have the most awkward, honest Thanksgiving in Anderson family history." "That sounds horrible," I said. "Probably."
But we need to start somewhere. That dinner was excruciating and healing in equal measure. Mom arrived looking nervous, bringing her famous cranberry sauce, the one dish she actually cooked herself for holidays. Dad came separately, with a humility I'd never seen in him before. Helen Wilson brought pumpkin pies and dignity. Aunt Patricia brought 3 bottles of expensive wine and 0 patience for niceties. Somewhere between the turkey and dessert, after enough wine had flowed to loosen tightly held composure, the real conversations began. "I never meant to hurt you, Mackenzie," Mom said, her voice small. "The rules I set for you, they were meant to protect you from making my mistakes." "By making me miserable instead?" I challenged. "By keeping you from living a double life like I did. I thought if I could shape you into someone who fit perfectly into society, you wouldn't need to split yourself in 2 like I did." She stared into her wine glass. "I was raised to believe appearances were everything. When I realized I wasn't happy in my marriage, I didn't know how to leave. The affair with Jimmy was wrong, but it felt like the only way I could breathe." "You could have gotten divorced," I said. Dad spoke up then. "That was my fault too. When I found out, I was more concerned about what my colleagues would think than about what was happening to our family. I suggested the arrangement. I thought it was sophisticated, European almost." He laughed bitterly. "Instead, it just taught our daughters that lies were acceptable as long as they were convenient." As the night progressed, hidden truths emerged like long-buried artifacts. Mom admitted she'd always been jealous of my independence, my willingness to buck convention. Dad confessed he'd used work to escape a marriage that had died years ago. Taylor revealed she'd broken off an engagement last year because she was terrified of repeating our parents' mistakes. The climax came when Helen Wilson, after her 3rd glass of wine, stood up with tears in her eyes. "I've spent 20 years pretending not to know my husband was in love with someone else," she said, looking directly at my mother. "I won't spend 20 more pretending it didn't happen. Claire, I forgive you, not for your sake, but for mine. And Mackenzie," she turned to me, "thank you for giving me the push I needed to finally choose myself." That's when the cranberry sauce incident occurred. Mom, in a fit of emotion rarely displayed, stood up too quickly, knocking the crystal bowl onto the white carpet of Taylor's dining room. As the deep red stain spread across the floor, something unexpected happened. We laughed, all of us, a genuine, cathartic release that somehow broke the final tension. The Tuscany trip transformed, too. Dad ended up going alone, not as punishment, but as a personal retreat to figure out what he wanted for the next chapter of his life. He sent us pictures of sunsets over vineyards and texted about the cooking classes where he was the only single man among couples. He seemed lighter somehow. Mom moved into a condo downtown, began therapy, and started dating again, awkwardly, authentically. She and I began the slow work of rebuilding our relationship, this time based on who we actually were, rather than who she thought we should be. As for me, I found unexpected allies in the aftermath. Helen Wilson and I meet monthly for coffee. Aunt Patricia became a mentor of sorts, with her take-no-prisoners honesty. Even Taylor and I grew closer, our shared experience of family upheaval creating a new bond between us. The most unexpected twist came 6 months after that fateful Thanksgiving. I received a letter from Dr. Wilson,
a handwritten apology that ended with a shocking revelation. He had set up a trust fund for Taylor and me years ago, contributing to it monthly as some form of penance.
"I couldn't be honest," he wrote, "but I could at least try to provide some security for the family I helped fracture." The amount was substantial, enough for a down payment on a house or to start a business. After much thought, I donated the entire sum to a family counseling center in our town. Some debts can't be paid with money, and some wounds need different kinds of healing. It's been 2 years since the night I came home early from the hospital and walked into that nightmare. 2 years of hard conversations, boundary setting, forgiveness, and rebuilding. They say the truth sets you free, but they don't tell you about the demolition that happens first, how everything has to come crashing down before you can build something real. Our family isn't perfect now, far from it, but we're honest. Mom still occasionally slips into her old judgmental habits, but now I can call her on it without fear. Dad and I have deeper conversations than we ever did before. Taylor and I are actually friends now, not just sisters bound by DNA and secrets. Last month, we attempted another family Thanksgiving. Mom brought the cranberry sauce again, this time with a splash guard that made us all laugh. Dad brought his new girlfriend, a history professor who challenges him intellectually in ways that seem to light him up. Helen Wilson came too, with her new partner Susan, a plot twist none of us saw coming. I won't pretend it was perfect. Old patterns don't disappear overnight. But sitting at that table, looking at these imperfect people trying their best to love each other truthfully, I felt something I'd never experienced in our perfect family before: peace. So if you're living in a house built on secrets, if you're suffocating under the weight of keeping up appearances, or if you're the family misfit wondering why you never quite fit the mold, maybe the problem isn't you. Maybe it's the mold itself that needs breaking. The truth is messy. Confrontation is terrifying. But on the other side of that fear is a life where you can finally breathe. If my story resonated with you, hit that subscribe button and share it with someone who might need to hear that they're not alone. And remember, sometimes coming home early is exactly what needs to happen, even if it leads you straight into a nightmare. Because nightmares end, but living a lie, that's forever. Thanks for listening to my story. I'll see you in the next video.